Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. So today, of course, I have a lovely video here for y'all today. So, we're going to be talking about the Everdark bosses. Now y'all might be asking yourselves, well, okay, y'all, this isn't a ranked video, there's no ranked in the title or anything. Now, I'm not going to rank these yet. I'm not going to rank these yet until the rest are out. I'm going to say at this point, do not be surprised if Holster does not get an Everdark. Do not be surprised if Holster does not get an Everdark. I'm saying that right now. I'm going to act as if Holster will not have an Everdark version. Strictly due to the fact that there's really been nothing leaked about an Everdark version of his or anything like that. Um, Also, I have heard, apparently, before the Everdarks of these bosses had released, there were unused parts of their music. However, Holster uses every part of his music. So don't be surprised if we do not get an Everdark version. Once they have released, I will be actually ranking I'll be doing a new ranking based on these bosses' Everdark version specifically. But for this video, I really do want to discuss these bosses a little bit more at length. I will mention a strategy here and there. Don't expect me to really talk about music for any of these boss fights, um, because my opinions as far as music has not changed in any way, shape, or form. So just keep that in mind as we proceed further. Just keep that in mind. I will more so be discussing what happens to the boss visually. Does the arena change? The actual mechanics of the fight, if they have them, that sort of deal. And I will be giving each boss a letter grade. If I give the Everdark an F, that means it is worse than the normal version of the boss. And maybe have like F means like the Everdark version made the boss worse. And A, that means that the boss it was a massive improvement, right? Obviously, I'm giving C. It's like it was indifferent. Okay, I'm gonna talk about these bosses in release order. So that is extremely important to note. That's not how they're. I'm not talking about them in the order they are listed. I am talking about these bosses as they are as they got released, as far as I remember. Now, speaking of which, the first boss we're going to talk about is going to be Adele. Adele, Baron of the Night. He was the first Everdark boss to release, and oh boy, this boss is a did now keep in mind I did not like this boss at all originally. And this boss starts in second phase. All Everdarks start in second phase. Maris is a little bit of a strange situation. I'll get to Maris later. Um, by the way, I'm going to be referring to most of these bosses by their actual boss name and not their quote unquote, you know, their expedition. Because the expedition is a little bit different. But Augur is a little bit of a weird situation, so we'll be discussing her later. That boss later. Now, as far as Adele, in terms of visually speaking, there's a noticeable difference. There's a noticeable difference. It definitely feels like there is a noticeable difference with the rocks really coming out the mouth or whatever, right? The moveset is a little bit chaotic and a little bit all over the place. I do wish the tornado that the boss releases at second phase was a little bit thicker, so visually, so that it was a little bit easier to tell where exactly it was. But I don't mind the mechanic of jumping over. However, a few issues that I have with Everdark Adele is the boss is very difficult to poison by default, but that's mostly because he moves around so fucking much. So actually, at least the best run that I've had with Adele was honestly it was 3 Wilders, but I had Malekith's Blade. I had Malekith's Black Blade, and it kind of demolished him. If you have a poison-like effect, that is extremely potent. Um, Think like the red flame, that sort of deal. But also Frostbite is extremely effective on this boss as well. It doesn't take that much to proc, so I do recommend running Frostbite or something like that. All of that said, though, I do think this is actually an improvement upon the regular version. It does feel like a natural progression. I would like to see these Everdark bosses and the normal combined with drastically reduced damage output. I would also like to see the health pool reduced to really justify having 3 phases. But I think it would be pretty awesome. The arena change is pretty cool as well. This boss is pretty good. I'm not gonna necessarily give it an A due to the boss's health pool does seem a little bloated, and the fact that poison does, even though it says weak to poison, it doesn't necessarily work out that way. And unfortunately, Adele is not weak to anything. He's not weak to anything except for poison and frostbite. And obviously Scarlet Rot, but that doesn't really matter. And he can be slept, but it's a little bit difficult to proc that off of him if you don't have a weapon that has it already. But he's not. He has some resistances, but he's not weak to necessarily any element or anything like that. So I give him a B though. I give him a B. Solid improvement, pretty good. So yeah, he's getting a B. Now the second boss they released was Fulgore. Fulgore was probably the biggest disappointment. Obviously, he has his lightning resistance, he has obviously the lightning weakness and holy resistance, and weak to every status effect. But the issue I have with him is he just gets a big lance. Big lance. I was hoping something would happen with his arm or some cool shit like that. I will say his AoEs are so fucking massive. The times I've been this I've been wilder, so I can grapple out of the way. I think I've ran it once as an Iron Eye, and I would just iframe dash through the AoEs. But I don't really like this boss very much. I don't. He's the only Everdark that I have fought so far where it feels unnatural. I can't see a true progression throughout each phase. I don't know. Let me know if y'all think something is off, but it feels a little off sometimes. Also, dear God, the light blades, the range on them is also kind of fucking crazy. I will admit. He wasn't the hardest Everdark boss, but he wasn't the easiest either. So, yeah, that's just that whole situation. With Fulgore, whatever you. All in all, though, he's also not a boss that doesn't really have any mechanics. With Adele, Baron of the Night, obviously you jumped over the tornado or whatever. That was kind of the only thing that happened. But in his case, in Fulgore's case, there's not really anything that interesting to say about him. So I'm just going to give him a C here, mostly due to the fact that there's not really much going on. I don't think the fight is worse. I don't think Everdark made base Fulgore a worse boss fight necessarily, but he definitely didn't make him better. This is probably the most disappointing Everdark. Now, after Fulgore, we have Sentient Pest. Also known as Noster. We'll be referring to from now on as Noster. Now, keep in mind, another boss that I ranked absurdly low. Not absurdly low, justifiably low. And, I was like, man, they should combine the bugs or whatever, And they sort of did that, but kind of not really. I do think I think the Everdark version is way better. Way better than the normal version. Starting out in second phase is a little bit interesting to me. It does feel a little bit wacky at times. But the extra little moth soul, whatever you want to call it, the extra little bug coming out, the red thing or whatever, it was pretty cool to see. I do think, if flip-flopping between the bosses and having what seems to be more of like an enhanced moveset, I thought was a pretty interesting idea. My only qualm would be it is absurdly weak. It can get steamrolled. It can get absolutely steamrolled. But I don't think that's necessarily to its detriment. I do think there's some benefit to it, considering that it can heal. Considering that it can heal, I do think that's kind of necessary for, because if you're struggling, you're cooked. You're cooked. Um, so yeah, it doesn't fix the issue of the boss only being able to be ranged at times and making melee users useless for a chunk of the fight, even in second phase. But I don't think that's enough to really knock points off for this fight, considering its massive improvement. So I would say that this probably gets an A from me. I think this actually gets an A from me. My only gripe here is if you were to combine all three phases together, because I'm also kind of thinking in a way of, okay, well, the third phase had to have gotten cut at some point. It's just the absurd health pools of the first phase and second phase in a way is just so ridiculous. Also, another thing that I kind of don't really like about Noster, just even in the Everdark version, is the fact that they're resistant to everything except for fire. That's something I'm not a huge fan of. Also, you can't really get status effect off of them unless the boss is in Scorpion mode for the most part. Because things like Bleed and Frostbite aren't necessarily on bows and like ranged weapon as prevalently as on melee weapons. But yeah, that's the Everdark Scorpion. Well, Noster for y'all. Absolute cakewalk, but honestly, a pretty fun fight. Pretty fun fight in my opinion. Now on to the most recent boss fight. On the most recent boss fight, which is Augur, also known as Maris of the Night or whatever, Maris of Fathom Night or something like that. But Augur, another boss I was not a huge fan of. So far, we've only got one boss in an Everdark that I've actually liked. As far as like I liked their normal version, and that was Fulgor. Which just make me a little bit concerned for Tricephalos and Libra and those two bosses, because I really like those bosses and I hope they do a good job with their Everdark. And yes, I am scared of Libra. I'm also a little bit concerned about Caligo, but not really that much. But Libra, I think everyone is the most scared of Libra currently. But going back to Augur here, Augur I thought was mid. That was just mid-fight, not egregiously awful, but also not really that good either. Now, interestingly enough, based on what I've been able to tell and that sort of stuff, Augur doesn't start in second phase. Augur doesn't spawn the hands out of the ground, ever. It seems like Augur just starts in first phase, which I thought that was really interesting. Especially if that's like actually the case. It's a little bit difficult to tell because the Everdark version of Augur, as far as I've been able to tell, doesn't drop the Dewdrop. His moveset is a little bit more basic. I really do think that maybe we're dealing with a first version of Augur. So I think I thought that was kind of interesting. It does make it to where I don't necessarily see the natural progression, but unlike Noster and Adele, where they have a clear track, it feels like we have two separate versions of the boss. This is what it feels like. It doesn't feel like we're fighting necessarily a souped up version either of original Augur. It feels like there were two separate fights made. Or if I were to be put on my tinfoil hat, I would guess that at some point in development there was a fork in the road, and they, instead of being like, okay, we'll do this or this, they just decided to say fuck it and do both. And for something that celebrates, in a way it celebrates From Software's history, in a way, bringing back old bosses and weapons and whatnot. I definitely didn't really think about Storm Ruler, because Storm Ruler has also appeared in somewhat way, shape, or fashion in every single Souls game. Obviously, Bloodborne and Sekiro are exceptions, but, that's not even there. But, like, as a Demon Souls, Storm Ruler was used against the Storm King. In Dark Souls 1, You got it at the end of Sieglin's quest, I believe. I don't know about Dark Souls 2, but in Dark Souls 3 you use it against Yoram the Giant, and in Elden Ring a version of it does exist as the Serpent Hunter Spear that you used against Rykard. So it's there in spirit. But in Elden Ring, Night Rain, it is back. It is back. But the Storm Ruler is an Ash of War, which I thought was very interesting. By the way, I don't know if Shadow of the Erdtree DLC has that Ash of War or something like that. This looks completely new to me, so I'm guessing no. But if it does exist in Elden Ring, and if it existed before this, just let me know in the comments. But I thought it was interesting to use this here. This would not have been the boss I would have thought it would have been used on. If anything, I would have thought it would have gotten used against an Everdark holster. Because I was thinking more like in line of Yorm. The bosses that it is usually used on usually tend to be big, not super fast moving necessarily. Storm King was a different situation. But I am glad it's back. Augur, I do have the most to say about because it's the most unique. It's the most unique. So, the loot that you get on your average run is very, very important to your run. Very, very important to your run. However, for Augur, something that was interesting is you want to have a blank slot. You want to have one blank slot, or keep your main weapon and swap it out. The Ash of War will always be on the starting weapon. So if you're a Wilder and you swap to katanas, you're gonna have to swap back to that main weapon. So just keep that in mind. The same goes for Iron Knight. It cannot be any other weapon. You don't upgrade a weapon. It is you grab the weapon itself. But something that I found really interesting is I wasn't going for the passives that I would usually go for. Because usually I will go for, say if I'm on Wilder, I'll go for like lightning damage up or whatever, skill attack power up. I like to go for two-handed, like those kind of passives, right? But in this one, I actually wanted a continuous HP recovery. I wanted charged attacks, charged skills. I wanted charged stuff. But also, at least one person needs to have a healing spell, like a healing seal. And that wasn't something I really ever ran into. I think I've only ever used a healing spell once. But for this fight, a healing spell is really, 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 really useful. And that was something I was not expecting at all. But also, like, going hard into magic on a melee character was also quite a unique experience as well. Using magic attack power up, because usually I'm only used to doing that on Recluse. But this was kind of interesting to do on a run, because you're looking, instead of looking for, instead of being like, okay, I need this and this, and I need to look for this and this and this, instead, you're looking at, I need, like, on your average run, you just pick something up, I could use this, but on this run, you're like, I need this and this and this for Augur. I'll say Iron Eye is probably the most impacted, because projectile damage drop-off reduced is completely useless. It's completely useless for the Everdark version, at least the second phase. Which also, the second phase has a pseudo-third as well, in which you'll gain the purple ring around her, and you have to pop those things. That being said, that's not super important to pop those per se. Just obviously target her main body. Iron Eye's ultimate is pretty decent at popping them. But she does have to be a little bit close, so just keep that in mind. And obviously, if you successfully pop those, she'll go down, and then you need to charge up your Storm Ruler, swing it, and then do some light attacks. With that Ash of War. So, all in all, I really think this boss fight is fun. You can't exactly go all in on having that relic at the final fight, because otherwise you're not going to make it yourself. You're not going to make it there in the first place. So this is the first Everdark that really changed the way that I would usually do an expedition. So I thought that was quite unique. I thought this was really, really fun. As far as the run as a whole, now the boss Augur herself. That was all right. Um, Actually, Fire was a little bit. It felt a little bit tanky. I'm gonna be real. She felt pretty tanky, despite I had some really solid buffs. But yeah, Augur was a little bit. I don't know. It's just some of the movesets has an extremely wide AOE. The water the water throwing or whatever, Wilder was so good to just quickly move. The beam up is a little bit difficult to really dodge. Well, if you're trying to move out of the way, it's a little bit difficult. Kind of just have to iframe that shit. I didn't do it successfully, but if you have Wilder's ult, you can ult through it. You can ult through it for iframes or whatever. So yeah. All in all, I think I give Augur another A. I think I give Augur an A. Really solid improvement. That being said, I would not like this to be put with her other counter, with the normal counterpart. I would like these to be separate. These two should be separate. This does make me curious on how Tricephalos is going to go and how Libra is going to go. Because Libra kind of has multiple different states. So I'm really curious on how Libra is going to start out. Um, So yeah. Anyways, though, let me know what y'all thought of the Everdark bosses in general. I think so far they've all been pretty solid. If I were to say who was best and who was worst as individual bosses, I would say Augur's the best, then Noster, then Adele, then Fulgor's the worst. Just because I didn't really like Fulgor that much, the Everdark version at least. So, on that note, though, thanks for tuning in. We are in August now. So, in a couple of weeks here, I will be putting up a poll asking y'all which horror games y'all want me to play here in a couple of weeks. However, though, there's one exception. If a certain game does get crossplay, then it'll be in relation to that. It'll be in relation to that on what horror game I get played for October gets applied. And so, on that note, though, thanks for tuning in, and I will catch y'all on the flip side.